This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development, providing graduate-level education to working professionals, online, on campus, and on-site. For more information, please visit study.stanford.edu.
Welcome to the Stanford Seminar on People, Computers, and Design. Today we're really lucky to have Cathy Marshall from Microsoft Research. And there are a couple of interesting things about Cathy which I'm going to direct you to her website for. Most notably, she is related to Elvis. She's also, it's true, I looked on her website. Everything on the web we know to be of complete veracity. Also, at lunch with Cathy, it struck me that she's probably the very first person to, on Microsoft's dime, go around and ask people the question of, show me all the cardboard boxes in your basement and find the oldest thing that's down there. And so for a really illuminating talk today, we have Cathy Marshall.
Well, thank you, Scott. That was, my mic's on? Am I good?
Mic's on.
I'm good to go. Okay. The title of my talk is It's Like a Fire, You Just Have to Move On. And what I'm going to talk about today is an effort to collect data in service of designing a personal archiving service, and what I've learned so far and where we're going with it. And it's like a fire, you just have to move on, is what a lot of people say when they lose their digital stuff. You just got to move on. It's like your house burned down. Okay, and you know, if your house burned down that often, you'd probably try to find out which of your family members is the arsonist. But there you go. Increasingly, we are our digital stuff. And this is an article I found when I was reading in the airplane. I was reading an Esquire magazine. And the premise of this article was the writer of the article was giving people $1,000, these strangers. He'd walk up to them and ask them for their wallets or for their dogs or for their wedding rings or for their laptops. And it turned out that people were unwilling to give them their laptops. And that was kind of, I noticed this quote and I thought it was really interesting. At a Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, I approached a kid in a Fuji's t-shirt, hunched over an ancient-looking laptop covered in skateboarding stickers. He thought it over and shrugged. No way, he said, I am this shit, everything on here. A woman at the same shop said she hated hers. But come on, she said, sell you my laptop? That would be like selling you my knees. That's really interesting. You know, people's digital stuff is starting to matter to them. You know, 15 years ago, you couldn't find this, but now this is really true. And it seems to be true across the board. It's true for scholars, it's true for kids, it's true for latte drinkers, it's true for everybody now, I think. Everyone I've talked to has stuff they care about. And in some sense, you could say, are you just problematizing something that's not a problem? Why, you know, these people are unwilling to sell their PCs. Why isn't that good enough? Why isn't my PC my personal digital archive? Why isn't it my personal digital library? And in some sense, there was some shade of this. This is a quote from about I guess it's 6 years ago now, that Cliff Lynch was talking about why ebooks didn't go. Why did ebooks crash and burn so badly? And at the time, I was working on ebooks, and I kind of knew a lot about why ebooks were crashing and burning. But I really liked his formulation. And what he said was that, you know, an ebook as an ebook is not a big deal. But if you think of one of these as a portable personal digital library, not a portable electronic book, that's when, you know, the future of these appliances is going to show the promise. And so what's wrong with this picture? Why am I problematizing it like this? Is it because her seating position is so not ergonomic? Or is it because black jeans are not with the program anymore? Or is it because she hasn't installed her Windows updates? Or maybe this isn't her laptop. She picked up the wrong one at airport security, something I'm always afraid I'm going to do. Or maybe her ISP has just declared bankruptcy. And really, the answers are C, D, and E, in fact, because a stranger offering us $1,000 is probably the least likely way we'll lose our stuff. We'll get a virus, or, what did I say there? Just a minute. We'll get a virus, or we'll change computers, or we'll have stuff on the network that we'll lose. That's how we're going to lose our important digital stuff. It's not because of technological catastrophe, and I'll show you why I think that in a minute. But in our minds, we have everything on a single computer, but really we don't. We have it spread all over the place in different, and the platforms and the applications and the media, everything changes. So as much as we'd like to conceive of this as being our archive, it isn't. When I first started writing about this a while back, I was writing about archiving hypertext fiction. And a reviewer said this. He said this, and in fact, I recognized his writing style, so I asked him if I could use this comment because I thought it was sort of apocryphal in just the right way. He said, "Seriously, what's the hang-up? As long as I take out the photos and look at them every decade or so, it's a piece of cake. We buy a new computer every few years, spend a few minutes moving our documents folder to the new machine, we're done. You aren't suggesting that come 2054, nobody will remember how JPEG works." Fair enough. The translation of that is, why don't we just do what our parents did? Why don't we just rely on benign neglect? This, in fact, is a photo I found in a box that we got when my husband's father died. We got this box of photos, and it even had metadata on it that I've unfortunately cropped off. It said, Jewess with carp. Okay? And so this works, and this is a kind of similar photo I found on the web. I don't think this is going to be around to inherit in 70 years. Although, as Thomas Tansel said, neglect can sometimes be an artifact's best friend, and that in fact is true when you start thinking about how you go about archiving your stuff. I have a bunch of vinyl records. I'm showing my age here. I have all these vinyl records, and about, I don't know, quite a long time ago, 20 years ago, I asked for advice on how to archive them. I had some rare ones, and my friend who had a Nakamichi tape deck said, "Here, I'll put them on reel-to-reel tape for you. Then you'll have them forever." I said, fair enough. And he put them on reel-to-reel tape, and I have the reel-to-reel tape. No way of playing it. I haven't had any way of playing it in many years. So that was my archiving decision. Benign neglect would have worked better. And in fact, due to the long tail phenomenon, I can go buy these rare records on Amazon now. That kind of took me aback when I found out that I could just go buy them for $18. These things I've carried around all these years. And in fact, a computer scientist version of benign neglect is shove everything into a big database now. It's sort of the My Life Bits tactic. Shove everything into a big database now and decode it later. And it reminded me of this thing I found on the web. This is a bookcase now, and it goes in the ground later. The size is whatever you need. I thought very practical. And in fact, this all frames the problem as one of format. And you notice that the reviewer, when he was talking about this paper, he said, "What do you think? In 2054, no one will be able to decode JPEG." And in fact, people go about archiving their digital stuff. They believe they're doing this right now. They believe they're actually kind of taking care of it. They sometimes decide that their backup is the same thing as an archive. Now, anybody who's ever tried to retrieve something from a backup knows that a backup is not an archive. It's good IT practice, but it doesn't address the problem. Or they move their files wholesale onto their latest PC. In fact, I was asking someone for a demo of something yesterday, and he did this. He went to all of his machines. He had lots of My Documents folders from every single desktop he'd had in the past 5 years. He had this My Documents and My Docs and My Old Docs. And it's sort of like thinking about what would happen if you had a uStore that could become infinite. Think about the mess that would be. Another thing they do is they write their valuable files to removable media, which of course is kind of scary because removable media is totally vulnerable. They use email plus attachments and mail things to themselves. We talked about that at lunch. I think that's another common strategy. Or they spread their files over all kinds of public sites. They put them on YouTube and they put them on Google Video. They'll put a video on pictures on Flickr and Zoomer. They've got stuff spread all over. They figure one of them will survive. Or, and this is my mother's strategy, you just save the whole platform. You turn off the Mac, you put it in a closet, and you figure you can boot it up when you need those Mac and tax files. Let's look at how the problem is framed once more. I said this, you aren't suggesting that come 2054 no one will remember how JPEG works. Well, in fact, it turns out that this general problem is actually a lot of different problems depending on who you ask. I came at it first by reading a bunch of papers that were in library and information science, where we're talking about archiving the things that are in the library. And there are all kinds of concerns about trusted repositories and replication and metadata that allows you to federate across different repositories, and provenance and copyright. All these things were important. And then I started doing this project on hypertext fiction, and it turned out that digital arts archiving had a whole different set of concerns, like whether something was intentionally transient. Is a performance piece intentionally transient? Do you want to record it? Does it change it to record it? What about fidelity of things like color and discovering obscure works? All kinds of different things turned out to be important when you started to talk to arts people about archiving. And then I talked to Larry Macintra at Adobe about records archiving. He said, wait, Cathy, we've solved the problem. You don't have to worry about it anymore. We've got PDFA. We break all the links. We keep very careful track of what's in the document. You know, we worry about authenticity and temporal integrity, and we've got all the records archiving concerns. But then you start looking at internet archiving and Brewster Kahl's effort, and you realize breaking the links isn't what you want to do. You want to keep the links, okay? And then you start looking at scientific data archiving, and you get a whole different set of concerns about instrument calibration and what algorithms were used to do gap filling with the data sets and so on. So what I'm trying to do is look at this whole set of concerns for archiving personal belongings and what's different and what's the same. And I'm not going to go through these existing solutions because it's sort of a laundry list, but I want to zero in just on personal digital archiving and what it means to design for that. And I'm going to bring together data that we gathered in 4 different studies. So I'm going to smush them all together. One of them is about consumers in 3 cities looking at what they have on their computers, what they care about, what they've done to keep it, whether they've lost anything so far. And in fact, they all had lost things so far. And the second thing was a survey and interviews of people recovering lost websites. And this is looking at the difference between the stuff people keep on the network, the stuff people keep on the web, and the stuff they keep on their own computers. And then we also have done a field study of researchers and their scholarly output. So you say, is it any different in academia? Is it any different when people have research output that they care about? And the third thing is I looked at my own email over 25 years, which was kind of scary. So there were 4 consistent challenges and themes that came up. I'm going back to this because I found it interesting to take it apart and look at how what this reviewer said mapped into these challenges. One thing he said was, we spend a few minutes moving our documents folder to the new machine. Well, one of the really big challenges is that stuff just accumulates. And you can think about this with your own stuff. It's just, people have a really hard time predicting what's valuable and what's not valuable of their stuff. They either just accumulate stuff or they ruthlessly eliminate it. This was a quote from one consumer participant, and he said, and this guy was a programmer, so he was pretty digitally savvy, and I said, well, what do you do with your stuff? Do you throw it away? And he said, well, he cleaned up his desktop once in a while, but not in any systematic manner. It's more like I have things littering the desktop, and at some point it becomes unnavigable. A bunch of them would get thrown out, a bunch of them would get put in some semblance of order on the hard drive, and some of them would go into various miscellaneous nooks and corners, never to be seen again. Okay. And it turns out to be really this problem of value. How do you predict something's valuable? How can you tell? And one thing that people do when they think something's valuable is they put it in different places. Of course, they realize that replication keeps stuff safe. Even consumers, the most naive consumer, would replicate files. The one problem with that is they often don't have the thing at hand that they would use. They say, yeah, I make copies of stuff, but of course I don't have any CDs here, but in theory, I make copies of stuff that I care about. And then when people from the Lost website interviews, people have this circular reasoning. They say, I mean, the photos go off my camera onto my computer before they go up to Flickr. So I always have master copies on my PC. And of course, when they change PCs, they kind of lose sight of the fact that they're relying on these master copies. So now they rely on the copies on Flickr. They say, I don't have to worry about the stuff on my PC because I have it on the web. So they have this circular reasoning that's going on. And then the researchers, interestingly enough, these are people who are very computer savvy. They say, well, I'm paranoid about losing data, so in addition to being on 3 computers, it's being backed up from 2 of them. So now they've got a bunch of copies, and I'll talk a little about that problem in a minute. The other thing that people do is that they try to stay organized, like the consumer I first quoted. They try to stay organized and lean. Being organized is considered a really good thing. I mean, there are books, self-help books up about it. You know, we talked about them at lunch. It's a big thing to stay organized, very important. And this was a couple going through their hard drive. These people were not really computer savvy, and we were watching them go through their files, and they said, well, I don't know what that is. You might as well delete that as far as I'm concerned. And the number of times that's happened to me when I've interviewed people has been astounding, where you're looking at their files with them and they just start deleting stuff. And you say, no, don't do that while I'm watching you. Please don't do that. And you get really nervous and you say, don't. But they do that. They feel like they have to be in control of their data. And that's why I think the strategies that involve keeping everything just aren't going to be emotionally viable. You can't tell people to keep everything. They get very upset. Even if you hide it from them. Some people say, well, we'll have a deleted bit and we'll just hide it from them. That doesn't work. They know it's there. And if they ever encounter that again, you're in trouble. They don't want the pictures of the ex-wife in there. And then from the researcher interviews, the same thing happened as with the consumer interviews. There's gobs of junk out there that should get deleted. For example, we just got log files from various test runs. And so he wants to delete these things. He's going to do them while I'm watching. And from the consumer interviews, this is sort of the philosophy of a lot of people. In the future, I will become a lean, mean, organizing machine. And we heard the same thing echoed in the researcher interviews. I need to organize this mess. So people have this, there's some benefit to organizing things. And a lot of people strike a value-neutral compromise by keeping stuff but not backing it up. This is really interesting. They kind of expect to lose it, but they don't want to lose it. So they have this kind of interesting tension. Like this, there was this one guy, he had 13,000 email messages, and we said, well, these matter to you? Oh, yes, these are very important. And do you back them up? Oh, no, I never have. He started backing them up while we were talking to him, which was kind of unfortunate. But then from the researcher interviews, this is another thing that happens is people have big data sets that they can't back up. And he said, unfortunately, I use a lot of data that is very, very big, gigabytes of stuff, and it's not backed up. It's a bad situation, but what can you do? And the thing is that this intangible value doesn't factor into real loss. So what people say is things like, we watched this. This is a college student. She found this. She said, this is my bird CD. It was a project she'd done for a class. I never thought I'd be able to find that. It's something I never want to throw away. I just spent so much time on it. Then she puts it in the drive, and it's not what she expects. It's something else. And she said, oh, it doesn't bother me that much because I don't really need that anymore. I mean, if I don't have it, it wouldn't bother me all that much. So she's gone 180 degrees in just seconds. Okay, and the other thing people say is if it isn't their own stuff, they say, I can just get it again on the internet, no problem. And William Jones has had this big project about keeping found things found, and he's very much investigated this kind of idea of replaceability of internet-based stuff. So what you hear with things like this is things like, I mean, nothing here is all that important to me because it's all things that I could download again if I lost it. If I Google stuff, I could find these things again. My pictures and my documents are more important because music you could always go and buy, or you could just go and burn it somewhere else. So the first challenge is to identify what's valuable amidst an ever-growing accumulation of stuff. Let's go back to the reviewer's comment, and this time I'm going to focus on, we buy a new computer every few years. And as I said before, people tend to view these computers kind of interchangeably, and what happens, as you'd imagine, is stuff just gets spread out all over the place. It becomes widely distributed. Things are online and offline, media types and peripherals just go in and out of style. You know, people find jazz drives and they say, oh, these used to be popular. I think I still have the drive for this somewhere. Or they put things on in email attachments and things just get really spread out. This is one of my favorite examples. We interviewed a performance artist. She lived in a one-room apartment, so she's in a studio. It's 250 square feet. How far can stuff go in a studio apartment? Well, she had the stuff that was in the room. She had two computers. One was dead. There was a Mac that was dead, and she had a new computer that didn't have her files on it yet because she was waiting to have someone else set it up. And then there was removable media that she had kind of scattered all over the room. And then there were things she printed out on paper to make sure she didn't lose them. And then she had several things, not a removable drive. The drive that used to be in that computer is now in a friend's house. And then she had files on another friend's computer that she just left on that computer because she couldn't do anything with them on her computer. She didn't have the right applications. And then she had two websites that were maintained by someone else where she contributed the material and someone else put them together for her. And then she had 4 email accounts. So she had stuff strewn pretty far and wide considering what a small space she lived in. And I thought about this with regard to my own stuff. What I tried to do, I thought, I have a lot of email. I really care about my email. So I'm going to look at and see if I can put together 25 years of correspondence between me and a couple people that I write to frequently. And I really love my email, but it doesn't mean I'm not flaky about it. And I made this table, and I thought it was sort of remarkable to me that I had used, I don't know, maybe 8 different let's make it 6 different email applications over the course of 25 years. And I can mostly get at it. You notice here I've forgotten the password to one of my files. It seemed so obvious at the time, but I couldn't get in there. I couldn't get that one. And eventually I did break into it. But you can kind of see that I had pretty uneven access to my own stuff. And then when we started looking at what happens when these things are on the web, what happens when I don't have them locally? And this was sort of an answer to the storage in the cloud. We won't have to worry about these things when there's storage in the cloud. And that's sort of the Microsoft answer often to this particular indictment, is don't we care about our customers' stuff? And they say, well, yes, there'll be storage in the cloud, and this will make the problem go away. So we did a survey of people who had lost websites, and we said, well, how did you lose them? You know, these are things you care about. You care about them enough to try to recover them. How did you lose it? Well, in a great number of them, the service or the server went away. So people would use these Web 2.0 services that were optimistically brought up, and they were advertised heavily. People would throw a bunch of stuff up there, and they would go away. And then ISPs people wouldn't read the EULAs, and the EULA would say, if you don't access your account every 3 months, we're just going to take it away. They go away. People lose stuff that way. People would lose things due to hackers and they wouldn't even know why they lost things, or there were some really interesting ones. There were several that lost them in police raids. So there would be something illegal going on the same server, not in their particular account, but on the same server. They'd lose their stuff. And then there were a few people that where they were trying to reclaim stuff where the owner of the website was dead, and they couldn't get the stuff because the ISP's it was actually sort of a policy problem. They weren't allowed to log into that person's account. The stuff was gone. So only, I think it worked out to be 5% were lost due to hard drive failure. That's interesting. So what people do when they have access to all these free services is they just put the content on multiple services, as you would imagine. And this was a art school student who was studying animation, and she had a lot of stuff she cared about. And what she did, she had this interesting strategy. I was interviewing her over IM, and she said, well, there are 6 online places where I store things and all. The school website, Blogspot, WordPress.com, Flickr, Zoomer, and then the 6th place was archive.org. And she had all these rationales for why she put things in different places. And I had, while she was talking, I had been doing some searches, and I said, well, you seem to have stuff in some other places too. And she said, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I have stuff on YouTube because people always tell me they don't feel like downloading my QuickTime files from archive.org. And so she's got stuff in different places that she's got there for different reasons. She's got stuff there because she has a different audience in some of the places. She said students in Taiwan looked at MSN Spaces more than they looked at some of the other blogging sites. And so she had stuff in different places for different reasons, and different audiences were available. And if you look at these things, they're not actually true copies. This is one of the pictures she had on Zoomer. I think this is what she considered the reference copy, and it has lots of metadata. It has the basic title and description. It's got some. She had even isolated a spot in there and annotated it, and then she'd described some things about the photo itself, because Zoomer is a site for photographers. And she'd added some tags to it, some in English, some in Chinese. Obviously, she didn't use a controlled vocabulary. They were just tags that she put on there that she felt at the moment. A bunch of structured photo metadata, some votes about its popularity on the site. And then she has some more copies. And interestingly enough, they also have some indication of the site, of the photo's popularity on the site, and so on. So she's got all these copies, but they're not exactly the same. As I said, that they have just different metadata for different audiences, and they're at different fidelities, and so on. And she started losing track of where everything was, and I saw why that happened. You know, when I looked at this animation she was talking about, I saw that she created it on one day, and then the next day she stored it several places. Obviously, she doesn't want to lose it. And then she put it in several places, or no, she added stills to Zoomer, so that's her photo reference site. Then she put it several places to advertise it. She syndicated it in several places, and then she put it in 4 different blogs that she maintains. So there are all kinds of copies and references to it now. And there are probably others that I haven't. This was almost a year ago when I interviewed her, so she probably has other copies of it now. It's interesting. She's losing track of it. So the second challenge is distribution, that the files just get moved around. And the third thing, let's return to the comment here. As long as I take out the photos and look at them every decade or so. I like that one. As long as I take out the photos and look at them every decade or so. Well, will he do that? Digital stewardship is a complicated business. And the reason why is it's kind of interesting. When I looked at the consumers, they had this unlimited optimism about the incorruptibility of digital stuff. They'd say, they're all digital files. Why would they stop working? And they also had this certain fatalism about the reliability of digital technology. And that's where we got if we had a fire, you just move on. And I heard that from so many different people. They all use this fire analogy. And they also have this fear about the vulnerability of networked storage. And they said things like, I don't know if I'd want to have my artwork or letters I read at my mother's funeral online. I feel more private about that than my money. And then this was another person who was worried about photos of his grandchild, and he said, 128-bit encryption, yeah. We'd have to have at least that much to protect our online photos. 64 bits has been hacked easy. So he's worried about photos. It's a little bit like, I lived in Texas for a while, and what happened there is people would get a hold of insecticides, and they'd poison things, and they'd really poison things. We used to call Bug Boy the pest control guy because he used less insecticide than we would ourselves. What happens when consumers get a hold of insecticides is exactly like what happens when they get a hold of security things. They just overdo them. And this is all taking place against a background of aggregated snafus. And this makes people at Microsoft really unhappy, although many Microsoft executives spend their holidays fixing up the family computer. What happens is people just have this whole slew of minor problems on their computer. The registry's all messed up, and they don't quite know what happens. They tell you all kinds of stories, but basically they just want it to go away. So they'll say things like, there's this thing that comes up, and it's a skins file. You can't open it, you can't delete it, so all you can do is X out of it to get on to wherever you're going. And then another one said, I don't know why the media player stopped working. It's just a mess with me. So you could tell things were happening with the registry. It wasn't good. And when you start thinking about automatic archiving, you have to realize it's taking place against this background that has malware and all kinds of, I think 2/3 of the people of the consumer group we looked at had viruses on the computer they showed us. You know, there were things that, or a computer in the house, there were things slowing down, there were things not working, and then they were afraid to do anything else about it because they said, well, you know, if I back it up or if I make copies of all the files on the disk, well, then I'll take the virus with me, so I really can't do anything. I'm kind of paralyzed. And what Jeffrey Adams, he gave a talk at Archiving 2006, and much to my surprise, he was having the same problem with scholarly repositories. They also, the files that were deposited had viruses, so it's interesting. The other thing is that people store things for the short term, and this is something we talked about at lunch. I think this is really important. People don't store things with the idea of long-term intelligibility. They really don't think about what it's going to look like in 20 years. This was someone, we said, this was a student, she said, well, I know it's on these CDs, and the way I can tell is I look at the back of them and I can see how far they're written. And so I know if it's music, it's going to be written all the way in, and if it's photos, it's only going to be written part way in. And I thought, okay, that's good. And this one, this was about physical storage of digital media, and I was really fond of this quote. She was going through, we asked her where her taxes were. She said she did her taxes on her computer, and she said, well, they're in this box. I have a lot of backup here from my office when I retired. I get calls from them, and they just want to know something. Meanwhile, she's going through this box, and she said, oh, Jimi Hendrix is in here. So she's got a music CD in there, a commercial music CD. See, this is the thing. I don't know what. So these are our software, and I'm sure that TurboTax. So she's looking for the disk that has TurboTax, and she thinks it's going to have her tax return on it. So this is, even when things make it to physical digital media, they're not organized. And of course, digital stewardship relies on ad hoc IT support, and probably a lot of people in this room are in the position of being the IT person for their family, because if you're a computer science student, you usually do IT for your family. And consumers all rely on this sort of ad hoc IT support, and it isn't always around. It just isn't there. And worse yet, multiple IT people that support the same computer come into conflict. And I hear someone agreeing with, that's good, yes. I tried to install it, Firefox, and then John said, don't install anything on your computer. I usually defer to John because he's the one who's got to come over and maintain it. So her ex-husband is maintaining her computer. So I have to make sure that it's okay with him, but Jack, who is her 18-year-old son, you know, Jack will just do whatever he wants. So she's got, and she had a partly installed Firefox on her computer. And it was coming up to be her photo viewer, and she was completely confused as to why this was happening. And of course, it's we, not I. And the thing about personal information management is it's not personal, it's communal. And people rely on other people to save their stuff. And this is a student who said, even my personal statement was saved onto that computer, the virus-infected laptop. Then, luckily, I also emailed it to my cousin, Camilla, at her house. So I said, Camilla, do you still have my UCLA personal statement? She's like, yeah. So I said, okay, can you please email it? So that's how I actually got it back on this computer. So this is all very complicated. So the stewardship thing is really, really complicated. And one thing that I wondered about was, you know, okay, these are consumers. Some of them are kind of naive about computers. Does that mean that web-savvy people aren't going to have these stewardship problems? And I don't think so. I think everybody has the same problem. The problem is that this data I have all over the place. This is a computer scientist I interviewed. It's very hard to remember a year later exactly where did you put that file. And the fourth challenge, I think, is the most important one. And that one is, I call seriously, what's the hang-up? And the hang-up is that no one has really thought about search over a long period of time. We've thought about it in the here and now. And what people have told me is well, we have desktop search. And the thing is, you can't search for something you don't remember you have. And as time passes, you don't remember what you have. And just from what I've seen and what I've seen of my own stuff, I think that's pretty universal. You don't remember the old stuff that you have. And if you remember that you have it, the memory is vague. You often remember it wrong. You don't remember enough about it to get it. And in the physical world, it's the thing itself that reminds you of why you have it. So you count on yourself re-encountering it, kind of coming upon it again, going through something, seeing it again, and it will remind you of why you have it. For example, this was in a study of clippings and what people keep. This woman pulled out an old magazine. It was a High Life. I think it's the High Times in Europe. And she said, when I'm old and gray, this copy of High Life will remind me of my backpacking trip to Amsterdam when I was 21. I'll just put it in the steamer trunk in the guest room closet. So she has a place, she's going to put these things, and she's going to come upon them again when she's old, and they're going to remind her of why she kept it. So the whole thing is encapsulated. So you can forget items, you can forget storage media, you can forget devices, and sometimes you can forget them all at once. And this one is embarrassing because it's me. And I made that chart about my email a long time before I made this chart, where I was going through my stuff and I found this file, this mystery file, and I realized that I had for a year, I had a BlackBerry in the early days of BlackBerries. And I don't know how I'm so persistent, but I had managed to type out long emails on my BlackBerry and back them up. And I did care about them, and I found them quite by accident. So you can forget about whole devices and whole places you've stored things. The other thing is the side effect of storing lots of copies of things is that our digital life is rife with copies of things, with clones of this and that we've put in places. And in the long run, we can't get away from answering the perennial question of which twin has the Tony, which I think probably there's no one in this room old enough to remember. And this is the example I use. This is the performance artist. She has pictures of herself that she's at some time moved to the desktop, edited some of them in Photoshop. She's emailed them to her performance partner to upload to her website. Then she's taken them off this hard drive and written them to CD because she's getting a new disk drive. She's restored them but hasn't reinstalled Photoshop, so now she can't open them. She doesn't know why. So she downloads them from her website again and re-edits them. And then she starts attaching them to email and sending them to boys that she's dating. How many copies does she have? And I thought through it, and she's got 12 copies of most of these photos in 2 different formats under 4 file names on 6 file systems and at least 3 resolutions. That's interesting. How was she going to retrieve it? Even if she knew what she wanted, could formulate the query, and got back all these, she doesn't know why they're different. She doesn't know that some of them are at low resolution and that some of them are in the camera's RAW format, some of them are in Photoshop format, and some of them are in JPEG. And then we looked at this problem, this was an eScience example, where we looked at copies of the same data in eScience, and it turned out that the problems are really similar. And that you have all these copies of the data sets, and they've been made with different gap-filling algorithms, and they have different data cleaning going on, different corrections to get out the unreasonable valuables, different adjustments for offsets these were sensor networks, and so there were offsets from the ground level. For sensor height, there were things to compensate. So people, once again, had this problem of not knowing which data set was which. And finally, I wanted to say one other thing about search. This was about search strategies, and I think this is really important about this kind of search, because when people are looking for things on the internet, it seems like it's pretty different in that any results will do. I mean, people just want, like this is one where this guy was looking up someone he was dating, and he looked up the people he dated beforehand, and he did searches. I think, we met, and I probably did a Google search. I like doing Google searches on people I meet, and I collected some information, and I guess I emailed this to her, which I don't think overall is a real great strategy for, getting a second date, but, he did this. And this was another one. This is a mom helping her kid with homework, and she said, well, what they'll say, I guess this is the assignment her kid got, okay, for Groundhog Day, and then they'll ask an obscure Groundhog Day question, like, what does he eat? I never knew Puxatawny Bill, Phil ate any specific thing, which I can't even remember anymore. I like Google because I think it's a really good search engine, and if not, I just ask Jeeves. Life is too short because I don't want to have 5 million choices to go through. So she just wants any answer. She doesn't care about whether it's right or not. She just wants an answer. And I think the live people found out that 65% of queries were question answering queries. So it's really a different problem. So the fourth challenge is long-term access. And when I first gave this presentation, it was right after the consumer study. I gave it at Microsoft to the guy who was my manager's manager. I was in Windows at the time. And he turned really bright red. He turned bright red, and he started, the kind of the legendary Microsoft manager thing, and pounding on the desk and yelling. And he said, what are you trying to do here, boil the ocean? And I had never heard that expression before. It's apparently a businessy expression about taking on too big a problem. And at the time, I couldn't even parse what he said, boil the ocean, what does he mean? But now we know it's taking on too big a problem. And I thought, no, not really. No, I think not trying to boil the ocean. I think what I'm trying to do is choose tractable problems for each of these challenges. Assessing value and maintaining provenance. Well, that seems like we could do something about that. We could use heuristics to detect what things are valuable by what people do with them. For example, people demonstrate the worth of things all the time. They attach files to email, or they spend a long time working on them, or there are different media that people know are valuable to them. I know I like my email and want to keep it. So there are things that we can do to assess value that are pretty easy, and we can store these values as metadata to the objects. That's not impossible. And we can track some aspects separately, and we can compute some value on the fly as a function of these different things that people do. And so, we've got a pretty good chance of doing this. And I think some of it will settle the issues of provenance, too. And one thing that we're not doing very well now is tracking this item-level provenance, where all the copies of things are and which one's the reference copy. That's not impossible. So I have a copy of this file on my own website, on Flickr, on my C drive, on my USB drive as a Gmail attachment, and on a backup. And I know that the copy on my C drive is the good copy. Well, it's not that hard to track which of those copies is the right one that I want back in the end. And the other thing is tracking the relationship among the copies. Well, I want to know that photo B is a higher resolution version of photo A, that I have this higher resolution copy, and that document D is a more recent version of document C. How many times have you gone through your own stuff saying, well, this doesn't look like the most recent version. I think it's the most recent version is somewhere else. So that's something that we can do. We can also support distributed storage, and that would be why I'm in a distributed systems group nowadays. I think the lesson of this is don't try to centralize. You're not going to win. People have different reasons for putting things in different places. And the materials themselves have different restrictions. Like some sites are limited to one media type, and sometimes files are very large and can't be put in various places. And for some people, it's going to be a gradual movement away from local storage. There are still a large number of consumers that don't trust storage on the network. They just don't think it's right. They want to keep things locally because they want to have control over them, and it'll be a gradual movement to get them onto network storage. And for others, it's about capturing the stuff that they put in Web 2.0 server-side stuff. When people lose stuff, they think they have it all locally, but they've added a whole lot of stuff in the interface and these other applications on Flickr, for example. They'll have added a great deal of metadata, and when they lose this stuff, they really regret that they've lost all the metadata they've created. So in the end, it's about the catalog. It's not about the stuff. And in fact, what we need to do is just develop a sensible architecture for distributed storage, where we have a gradual movement of stuff away from local devices and onto intermediate stores and replicated stores. And we're able to recover things from catalogs. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to... We also need to help people curate their digital belongings. And that means developing tools especially designed for digital curation, things that assume as little human intervention as possible. And one thing that I think about this is you have to realize that you're going to get it wrong. You can't, and also you have to realize one thing that I hear people say is we'll develop a whole library of emulators, and I think a lot of things won't need emulators. A lot of times it'll just be a matter of migrating things, and you'll lose some interactive capability over time, but it won't really matter that much because you're just going to want to view the things, not interact with them. Finally, there's providing new mechanisms for long-term access, and this is what we were talking about over lunch. And I think one thing that we need to start having on computers is a stable personal geography. And I think there are various people in this room who have even worked on this topic, where you start thinking about what's the digital equivalent of the trunk I have under the bed with all my photos. There isn't one right now. We don't have anything that's stable. It's undifferentiated. We need permanent digital landmarks that we can rely on. We also can use certain set classification schemes. People don't want to have to develop classification schemes, it turns out, but they also don't want anything too fine-grained. Some kind of coarse-grained classification scheme would help a lot with this. The third thing is value-based organization, where we start being able to see our older stuff in terms of what's valuable. What are the things I cared about 10 years ago? I don't want to see everything that I have from 10 years ago. I want to see the things I cared about. And then there are temporal views, like I believe there's a photo browser here and the Life browser at Microsoft that show you all your stuff in a temporal view. And then there are various things that you've done to imply interest, and that can sometimes be helpful in re-encountering things that you want to see again. There are some open questions here. I think there are some social challenges. There's the matter of software patents and proprietary formats. There's no easy answer to that, of course. There's a registry at the Library of Congress that Carolyn Arms has set up that is trying to take care of some of this because there are an awful lot of different formats. There's the matter of copyright and DRM, and that's interfering fairly dramatically with the permanence of digital objects. And there's also this matter of trading off trust and security, and I talked about that a little bit earlier, where people want to protect stuff in ways that is going to bite them later on. For example, they want to encrypt things that they are apt to lose the encryption keys for, so we have to keep that in mind when we develop solutions. My favorite open questions are the long-term value of new digital genres like blogs and MySpace pages and Facebook entries and stuff like that. Are kids going to want to see those in 50 years? They might. They might. I have the letters I wrote in college, and they're embarrassing, and I wouldn't show them to you, but I find them fun to look at. And how do these things fit with other online services and storage? For example, I noticed that my dentist has started keeping digital dental x-rays. How can I keep track of these things that are in other places? When I change dentists, when I change banks, I've started trusting my bank to keep my financial records. But every couple of years I get angry at my bank, and it's not my bank anymore. Another bank is my bank. How do I keep track of those online records as I change my mind about where I'm going to store things? And then there's the potential value, the value of what's now transient things, the things I record on my TiVo. Can I keep those? And of course, there's the purchased digital goods. And I've heard, I think Andreas Pepke has a story that he'll tell you about his iPod that where he got rather frustrated with the long-term prospects for his iPod music. And the other thing to remember is that it takes more than, I don't think this is one person or one company developing a service. I think it takes a lot of people. It takes a partnership between libraries and publishers and nonprofits and software companies and Web 2.0 companies and internet service providers to solve this problem. There has to be a sense of cultural stewardship underlying the whole thing, and there have to be workable copyright policies. And we have to address the constraints introduced by patents and proprietary formats. And so all these things have to be melded together and create, and this is the hardest part, this is why everyone gets angry, a financially sustainable enterprise out of all of this. So I think that's really all I have to say. I had help with the studies. Sarah Bly and Françoise Brun-Catin helped me do the consumer archiving study. Michael Nelson and Frank McCowan at ODU helped me do the website recovery study and the interviews. And the personal digital archiving technology development, I've been working with Catherine Van Ingen at Microsoft and the Community Information Management Project down here at MSR SVC. So I know that this was sort of a boil the ocean talk, but if anybody has any questions, I'd like to talk more about some of these things. That's kind of a okay, Paul.
I really enjoyed this talk, although it was very scary. It made me realize, not only do I have papers written in 2 formats that I can no longer read, I actually have software that will convert documents from one format I can no longer read into another one that I can no longer read. I had 2 questions that sort of coming out of what you were saying. So one is, I was struck when you tell the stories of these people and the way they tell stories about their archives, about how much of that stuff is related, and how much of the problems are related to like major life changes, moving house, moving city, moving computers, yes, moving jobs, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, play a role in lots of the things you were saying. So I wonder if there might be some opportunities then in terms of sort of articulating, one of the jobs here is to articulate a structure for what it is that people have, and to do that in terms of life stories and trajectories and biographies. So that's sort of one question. And the other one is, given that you're working with a bunch of people at Microsoft who I'm sure really want to build long-term, stable, distributed storage, with all those kinds of things, how do you persuade people of the importance of forgetting? You talked a little bit about that in some of those things, but that ephemera is ephemerality is as important as permanence.
Yes, actually, those are both really good points, because it turns out the way that academics and researchers lose things is moving institutions. That is just the biggest way that people lose things in that segment, in that population. So you're right, you're absolutely right about that. And it's also the change. When I change computers, I automatically lose things, because there are things that, some applications put things in kind of secret places, and I don't get everything. And so you're right about that. And the importance of forgetting, I don't know how to convince people of that. That's actually hard, because you tell computer scientists that you want to solve this problem, and they say, yeah, we'll just keep everything and we'll sort it out later. And they almost all say that. And you can't say, well, there are some things that people want to be in control of and they want to never see them again. Never. And they say, oh, well, we'll just put the deleted bit. They do. They all say, a deleted bit, of course. But they're still there. And what happens if, at some point down the line, some version of the software doesn't know about the deleted bit and shows them that stuff? And they think, but that's gone. And I've had that experience of, recovering things from old files, where you think something's gone, like it used to be that Word files would keep things that you thought you'd deleted, and they were there and recoverable. Yes, it's very important to keep the ephemeral things ephemeral. And to have some ephemeral left over, because you don't know what's valuable. So it's a tough call. You see why I got in trouble, though, about boiling the ocean. Yeah.
So, if we take the cloud as part of the picture,
Yeah.
what do you imagine, you're kind of at a nice vantage point for boiling the ocean, because, if anybody's got a big boiler, it'd be Microsoft. And so, we got the cloud, okay, we start, that's at least part of the picture.
Yeah.
Actually, here's my real question, are you advocating a fairly ad hoc approach of that we should embrace this, well, we'll just put photos here and music here and this here, or is there some kind of heuristics for, what stuff should go where and be written out how?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm saying is that the catalog is the thing that most centrally goes in the cloud, and that's the thing that you really have to worry about, because these other things will come and go, and it's fine if they come and go and you move things from place to place, but you always want to know where everything is, and that's the hardest part of the problem, it seems to me. And I think you're right, though. There are some things that are prescribed to go in certain places. Really valuable stuff. You know what stuff is really valuable. You don't want to lose, the photos of your first kid or that sort of thing. So the rest of the kids, of course, you can lose the photos. But exactly. It's like some stuff is valuable and you want to know where everything is. So that's what I would say goes in the cloud.
I wonder if, when you think about all this, if you think of it in terms of how many years does it need to survive? 'Cause if you look at the history of the world, there's certain period of time that things are going to survive. So some things that people have on their computers, I want my grandchildren to see that. I want my children to see that. I want to keep that in purgatory. That's a term I use for stuff that I might need for the next couple of years, but then I want to get rid of it. And I wonder if you think of it in those terms, whether you think there's any solution to printing out, other than printing out photographs, because I'm not convinced that anything other than prints is going to work for a couple hundred years.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually the hard part, is the stuff that needs to survive more than a lifetime. And that's where I think we haven't. There are various people who have taken that on, though. I think, in some ways, Brewster is trying to take on the cultural memory of more than a lifetime. And most people haven't taken it on for their own stuff. You can see that with these people dying and losing the websites. And I think a lot of soldiers have died, and their families have been unable to get the email accounts. It is something to think about. I think you're right, though. it's hard to guarantee it.
Just to kind of follow up on Paul's point about the importance of forgetting, we find that people sometimes mythologize artifacts that they think they have or have forgotten about, and when they actually have it, like, oh, it doesn't show the thing they're talking about at all. Or the idea of it is so much more important than what's actually there.
Oh yeah, no, that was the interesting thing is when you do make people take you into their basement and show you what's in that steamer trunk, it's not what they say. And you're right, it's not, they have mythologized it. They say, oh, I have this scrapbook I kept in high school and it's got all this great, cool stuff. And you make them go get it, and it is just the high school scrapbook, and it's just not, you can tell they're disappointed. And on the other hand, they find these things, you say, find me the oldest thing in your computer, and they find you some piece of email in there, you can tell they're going to go back to it after you leave, and they're going to go start pouring through these old email messages. So, both things are true. And that's the value problem. I mean, it's hard to sort that out. Okay, well, thank you. I think everybody else has solved it, so that's good.
For information on other online Stanford seminars and courses, please visit study.stanford.edu.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.